Clair Obscur Expedition 33 has been out for a little while now, and it deserves all the praise that it's gotten. It's almost a unanimous frontrunner for Game of the Year so far, and I'd say it's in my personal top 10 games. Now, I'm an old fart. I'm 37 years old. I've taken in a lot of different games, movies, and TV shows over the years, and the older you get, the less impact and excitement you tend to feel for things. It's something that not a lot of people like to talk about, but it's just a fact of life. As time goes on, your priorities change, and you've just been there and done that with so many other different types of media throughout your life. Something that might have seemed amazing in your teens is just another, well, that was pretty good style game in your 30s. But Expedition 33 was one of those times where it made me feel like that teenager again. Instead of listening to my usual music playlists full of metal and all its wonderful subgenres, I'm listening to this weird French opera soundtrack. Instead of focusing on my workouts, all I can think about is fuck that snake lighthouse thing, or how much I'd rather be rearranging my pictos right now than doing 20 rep squats. I was debating what may or may not happen with friends, and then trying to convince anyone who hasn't played it yet why they should. The gameplay, the narrative, the aesthetic, and the customization, everything about this game had me completely hooked. In a time where more and more people are complaining that creativity is dead, Expedition 33 shows up out of nowhere and blasts a huge middle finger right to that notion. So let's just dive into it, and I'll try to keep this somewhat organized. Full spoilers ahead. By the time I actually get this video out, anyone who's watching is already going to be familiar with the gameplay and how pictos work. I kind of feel like it's beating a dead horse at this point to really go over the basics. What I do want to talk about is how customizable the combat system really is. But for anyone who just wants to hear the story stuff, there's timestamps in the description. Anyway, I accidentally made the second half of the game way harder on myself, and I'm very glad for it. Expedition 33 is a game that practically begs you to find ways to break it. For the majority of people, that's going to be by using the cheater picto to take back-to-back turns, or turning maelle into a walking Game Shark code. I got my ass kicked by Sprong when SGA learned swim, then kinda forgot about him until I was already around level 80. Which meant that I didn't get the cheater picto until I only had the final couple levels of the Endless Tower and Simon left to do. But I also didn't try out Maelle's Stendhal move until around this time too. This meant that I was unintentionally playing against the late game meta and needed to find other ways to deal high damage. Since I'm also kinda shitty at video games, I was really inconsistent with my parries and usually still stubbornly kept failing those rather than just doing the easier dodges. Throughout the game, this led to me focusing significantly more on automatic healing than I'm guessing most other players did. Through Act 1, I didn't really know what the hell I was doing, but Act 2 forced me to start paying attention to my pictos and character builds quite a bit more. What did I then do? I essentially turned my party into the RPG version of a Magic the Gathering mono white life drain deck. As long as I could parry just enough to not die each round, I could just heal myself next turn, and then repeat the process while throwing in some skill moves in between. Considering I don't always have a ton of time for games anymore, this also kept me from having to replay fights. The possibilities really are endless here. You can do everything from glass cannon builds that one-shot everything, to spamming borderline infinite AP ranged attacks that burn, break, mark, and whittle down enemies' hit points. This isn't just with pictos either. Every single weapon has its own bonuses that can either help or hinder your playstyle. Again, since I'm kinda shitty at games, my strategy was to go with the path of least resistance over actual strategy. I wanted things like Verso's weapon that got him into S rank the fastest, and Lune being able to generate a ton of random stains with every individual action that she takes. Even without having the cheater picto for almost all the game, these weapons let me get those two characters at their highest damage output, or damn close to it, after essentially one turn. It's kinda crazy that if you go online and ask what each character's best weapon is, you'll get a ton of different player opinions on the matter. There are still a handful that most people seem to gravitate towards, but there's significantly more variance here than with so many other RPGs. In my opinion, things like that are some of the most impressive feats that Expedition 33 pulls off. They made just about as balanced a battle system as you possibly can, while the vast majority of other games tend to fall into specific meta builds that just dwarf all the other options available. The only real downside here is that rearranging pictos, weapons, and Lumina points will very likely start to get repetitive and time-consuming by the end of your playthrough. This is a small price to pay for the level of customization that's given to the player though. As for the story-based narrative fights, I never really had much trouble and could usually just build my characters however I wanted. I didn't have to get overly specific. Another small complaint is only having 6 special moves for each character, but I get why they limit that number. Personally, I would have liked to have had more options here, but in reality, if the player was allowed to equip more, then the game likely gets much easier. So it's kind of a necessary evil in limiting those. They made a very engaging turn-based combat system, the Pictos are extremely customizable, and each playable character has abilities that make them feel unique, which is something so many RPGs tend to struggle with. I don't think I really have anything overly new to throw into the gameplay conversation that hasn't already been said in hundreds of other YouTube videos. So what I do want to focus on before talking about the characters and the narrative is the world of Expedition 33. This is one of the most interesting and straight up beautiful settings I think I've ever played. As I mentioned in the intro, this just oozes creativity and originality despite being modeled after a real life location. Going into this game, all I knew about France was that they gave us Gojira and freedom fries, but the opening shots of this cracked and broken version of Paris are fantastic. It immediately made me wonder just what the hell was going on and how everything here came to be. Right off the bat, we get our first look at the monolith. This visual is frequently placed not so subtly in the background of most scenes. It always looks cool, and it's such a smart move by the developers to always keep the player focused on what the main goal is. But there's much more to it than that. This is the narrative, the gameplay, and the art design all coming together, complementing each other, and making one cohesive experience. How many times in games do we get put in a scenario where time is of the essence before some tragedy happens, but oh wait, we have plenty of time to fuck off and handle all the side stuff instead, for absolutely no reason other than the gameplay needs padding. In most cases, it's kind of a necessary evil because you still need to play the game, regardless of what might be going on in the narrative. With Expedition 33, this problem is cleverly solved with its world building. We have 1 year to get to that monolith, and our characters might need to use all of that year to figure out just how the hell to beat the Paintress. While that glowing 33 in the background is always our goal, it's also accepted that our team will need to make a ton of pit stops along the way. Meeting the Gestrals or looking for Esquia's rocks doesn't clash with the greater narrative of stopping the Paintress. The Expeditioners are learning the secrets of this world simultaneously with the player. The way Sandfall Interactive tied world building into its narrative is expertly done, which is kinda crazy to say because this is their first game. Whether Expedition 33 is lightning in a bottle or they go on to keep making hits is something that only time can tell, but for now, the team over there has put a lot of really big AAA developers to shame. Besides all that, these environments are just fucking gorgeous to look at. When you first leave the Spring Meadows tutorial and you're stuck with only Gustav and Lune at the ground level, this world seems massive, intimidating, and downright frightening after that introduction. Then as you gain more party members, little by little it gets more comfortable until you're flying around listening to an overworld theme that would fit right into that scene from The Shawshank Redemption. Speaking of flying around, Esquia has now become the best airship in a JRPG. But let's get back on track. I feel like they purposely made the Flying Waters as the first main level. From a visual perspective, this is probably one of my favorite levels ever. It doesn't really do anything out of the ordinary from the rest of the game, but the scenery is extremely memorable. Everything looks underwater but somehow isn't, even though there are fish and whales and I think that's a goddamn cuttlefish swimming around. The landscape switches from dull to bright colors that get highlighted by the reflections of the water, and it's just really satisfying to look at. I'm singling out Flying Waters right now, but really, the art design of all the levels is extremely unique throughout the entire game. The actual layout design is really well done too. At first, not having a minimap seems like kind of a big oversight from the development team, but once you run through the levels a little bit, you start to realize that they aren't that big and most areas are easily connected. Anymore, we're so trained to rely on the minimap that it feels immediately stressful at first to not have it. But once you get going, you quickly realize that the minimap not being there isn't that big of a deal. None of the locations are that hard to navigate. Another highlight of the level and art design is avoiding the dreaded hallway simulator criticism too. Since the majority of levels are outdoors and have no ceiling or roof, it makes them feel much more open than they usually are. Obviously, every area isn't a perfect linear line, but there are a lot of times where you're running down a clear path that pushes you forward, but it never really feels like that's what's going on. There's always just enough to explore to keep things feeling fresh, and the game heavily rewards the player for taking those extra couple minutes to thoroughly check your surroundings. Usually with the prize being more and more Lumina points, but also with the occasional better Picto or weapon hiding out in the corners of each map. While picking up Lumina points one at a time can seem like a bad reward for exploring, these things add up quickly over the course of a playthrough, and can be the deciding factor in how you build your entire party, and in turn, how you play the game. It's not just the art design of the levels either. The spectacle of most boss fights is perfectly done as well. I just said how they managed to use great art design to avoid the hallway simulator notion. They used great boss design to avoid the criticism of reused assets. Because the combat system is so reliant on parrying, dodging, and being familiar with the enemy patterns, you aren't worried as much about fighting the duelist or lampmaster bosses over and over, because now you're just thinking, I know his moves this time around, I'm gonna fuck this guy up. By the end of something like the Endless Tower, I did start to get a little fatigued with the overused enemy variants, but for the bulk of the game it's pretty damn good, and the majority of these reused enemy assets are in the side content and level farming areas. They don't really get reused in the narrative progression a whole lot. There is one other downside though. Some of these levels don't really serve any purpose. There's more than a few spots on the map that just contain a single screen and an item, which is usually a music disc. The Flying Casino looks awesome, and I thought I was going to get to have some fun gambling minigames, but there's really nothing there. Seems a little bit like a waste of time to go through this whole song and dance just to get a costume. It's not like these are well hidden or some sort of secret locations either. So when I got into a new spot and it turned out to just be one of these style areas, it did bum me out a little bit, but that's also just because I'm being an asshole and wanted even more content than they already put in the game. But I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that some of these areas have plans to be expanded upon with DLC. I never bothered to get platinum trophies in games because it's usually just tedious and not that fun to get the really specific or grindy trophies. But there are plenty of times where I'll play everything I possibly can. If a game's good, I'll happily do all the possible side content. When I got everything done in Expedition 33, I was genuinely bummed out in the best way possible. This game was so good that I just wanted more. At least with games like Cyberpunk or Baldur's Gate 3, I could start a new file and do quests that I might have missed out on or locked myself out of. But with Expedition 33, when I was done, that was it. I was done, and I didn't want to be done. It was a really weird feeling that not many games have given me before. Whether it's for better or worse, the best possible thing a game can do is make you genuinely feel something. And this was a game that did that for me several times over in several different ways. With the gameplay and the world, as I said, I just didn't want it to end. I had a while where I just kept flying around aimlessly, hoping that I missed something or forgot to finish a dungeon. Just like some of the characters in the game, I wanted to spend more time in this world. I wanted to keep exploring, but there wasn't anything else to explore. Just some gestural beaches and their janky controls to finish. I didn't want to move on to another game yet, and that was a weirdly satisfying, yet also huge bummer of a feeling. So that's something that I'll always remember, but there were a few other moments that really stuck with me too. So let's use that as the transition into the plot and the characters. Easiest place to start is right in the beginning, and as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the best introductions in gaming history. Right at the start of the game, the conversation between Gustav and Maelle gives the player so much foresight into the world. In just one short scene about the Gamage Festival, we see a mix of emotions ranging from acceptance and humor to grief and spite. Specifically with Gustav, there is a very direct sense of determination and duty in what he says. It's really a full spectrum of emotions. We get both the hopeful and hopeless thoughts that surround the Gamage. These are characters that have been through this same song and dance before and believe themselves to be accustomed to loss. The monolith is a literal death clock, and everyone knows when their time is up. Gustav and his old girlfriend Sophie decide to spend her last few minutes together before she fades away in this year's festival. They don't flat out say it, but it's heavily implied that neither of them particularly wanted to end their relationship. A combination of Sophie not wanting to have children and Gustav wanting to focus on his eventual expedition made them decide it was best to end the relationship, which left no hard feelings on either side. We've only been playing for a couple minutes, but the game has already drilled home the point that Gustav genuinely believes he can make a change in this world, that his will be the expedition to finally succeed in defeating the Paintress. To further show how important this is to him, Gustav has no problem when Maelle makes jokes about Sophie dying, I mean, hell, he even joins in on those quips. But when Maelle shows pessimism towards the goals of expeditioners, Gustav quickly corrects her and takes things very seriously. While most characters try to put on a happy disposition, you can tell there's an obvious feeling of defeatism behind the entire festival. It seems like Gustav is truly one of the few people left in Lumiere that still hasn't given up hope. At this point, even the expeditions themselves are seen as more of a tradition rather than anything that will make a real difference. Even though the player knows exactly what's coming, this is still a pretty sad scene, especially if you try and put yourself in the character's shoes. Have you ever had to put down an old or sick pet that's struggling, knowing that this day was around the corner but waiting for the right time to do it? Eventually that day comes, and you pet them until they die right in front of you. It's the worst fucking feeling in the world. Now imagine doing that when they're young and perfectly healthy. That scenario I just mentioned is what these characters go through every year, and they have become so desensitized that they just try to celebrate what they had rather than what was just taken away. This lore building is phenomenally done. There's a somber, heavy air around these scenes, yet they still manage to throw in tutorials and humor that doesn't feel forced or out of place. As everyone looks on, exactly what they assume comes to pass. The paintress stands up, and the number on the monolith goes down from 34 to 33, as dozens of people around the harbor begin to fade away. We quickly see that, again, most characters have transitioned their thinking into the festival as being more of a celebration of the time they had together rather than the time lost. Except for Gustav. We get one last conversation between Gustav and his sister Emma before the expedition sets off, as she's one last character to force home the narrative that these expeditions haven't really produced anything worthwhile yet. As Emma gives what starts off as a cliche speech that they even admit Gustav actually wrote, it then transitions into a cliche montage of them leaving, and I love it. It's the start of the stereotypical JRPG hero's journey as we see everyone acting hopeful, determined, and ready to explore uncharted territory. However, the crew of Expedition 33 is in for a very rude awakening as to the reality of life outside Lumiere. This cutscene is fucking great. With other really good intros like Ghost of Tsushima or The Last of Us, you already know that shit's about to hit the fan right from the start. I was not expecting something like that here. So we just saw that no one is safe from the Gamage, yet the first thing we encounter in the outside world is an old man, who then attacks the expedition without so much as saying a word.
Your phone. Fall back!
It's an absolute slaughter. This is a group of experienced fighters, and they are completely outclassed. As Gustav and a few survivors try to flee the old man, they get picked off one by powerful Nevrons. Surrounded by the death and destruction of his entire expedition, Gustav is already in a state of shock by the sudden onslaught. He takes an attack from a Nevron as the scene cuts to black. After the title card, Gustav somehow survives the assault and wakes up, seemingly being washed downstream during the battle. We get a couple tutorials and take down a much more manageable Nevron. The facial expressions from Gustav here are really well done. He's not all there and clearly still struggling to mentally process everything that just happened. Years of dedication and hard work were snuffed out in an instant. What little spark of life that was left in him quickly vanishes when he stumbles upon an old cave that's littered with dead expeditioners, including some fresh bodies of the people he knew. As he takes a seat up against the corpses, the previously determined Gustav is about to end everything himself. Right before he pulls the trigger, he's brought back from the brink by the tough love of Lune. After all that, now the game actually starts. Like, god damn, that's a hell of a way to kick off a game. This whole sequence from the rooftops of Lumiere to the distressed Gustav in that cave just perfectly showcases so many different character emotions and just how unforgiving this world can be. After that intro, I was actually surprised at how much humor there was in the game. After seeing that, I thought this was going to be an extremely bleak experience. But like the Persona series that Expedition 33 definitely takes some inspiration from, they do a really good job of blending the dark themes with lighthearted moments. Something that you'll also notice pretty quickly on is when the game decides to go all out with its performance and when to rein things in. With important cutscenes like these, they go all out. The graphics are top-notch and their faces are very expressive. But during regular dialogue, you'll usually see lips that don't come close to matching the character's words, or sometimes they won't even animate any type of facial movements while characters talk. For as gorgeous as the game's setting looks, it's not all that interactive. Things like furniture or plants won't react to you running into them, and invisible walls are pretty common. Characters and items frequently clip in and out of themselves, and hell, I think this is the default falling animation in Unreal Engine that they didn't even bother to change. But you know what? I don't give a shit about any of it. It all works here. A big reason why is that the developers have been extremely consistent in where they decided to put their time and money. Nothing really stands out in a bad way because it all flows together. Big time cutscene before a boss fight? Make it look like $1 million. Conversation where Gustav and Maelle give tutorials? Fuck it, cut some corners and save $1 million. That's really the biggest thing. We constantly see studios, both brand new and big budget, wasting money and resources on shit that doesn't matter until it eventually just kills the game, sometimes before said game even launches. Seeing as how they didn't have that much of a budget, Sandfall Interactive knew exactly where to allocate extra time and money and where they could get away with cutting corners. But let's get back to the game. After the expedition's failed voyage, we start to understand Gustav's motivations a little bit more. Simply defeating the Paintress isn't entirely Gustav's goal. He only wants to defeat the Paintress in order to protect the people that he cares about. There is a difference. Just look at Lune. Her focus is 100% about beating the Paintress at any cost and trying to learn as much about the world as possible along the way. This laser-focused approach is mostly due to how her parents raised her. You could use the cliche that she was literally made for this expedition. I'm pretty sure she says that her parents saw her as more of a tool than a child. Both characters are extremely dedicated for similar yet very different reasons. Out of all the NPCs we briefly meet in Lumiere, it's easy to assume that Gustav and Lune are the two most dedicated people in the entire city to the expedition. But when everything goes tits up, Gustav's main goal becomes just getting Maelle home safe. Lune and Gustav then argue a few times about where to go, what to prioritize, and whether they should even go look for Maelle or not. Stopping the Paintress has now become a secondary motivation for Gustav. He just wants to find Maelle and try to get her back to Lumiere safely. Lune, though, is incredibly pragmatic and single-minded. She's focused on the mission and doing everything by the book. While the two have a couple arguments, each time they do find a middle ground. Besides setting up their personalities and character traits, this also kicks off a major theme that we'll see throughout the entire game. Neither character is wrong in their way of thinking. They're both making perfectly logical points despite being on opposite sides of the spectrum. Whereas these two characters find a middle ground and everything works out for now, that will not be a continuing theme with the other characters. Before I keep pitching a tent about the narrative, I do want to pull back a little bit. No game is perfect, and Expedition 33 isn't an exception to the rule. I do think that the game stumbles a little bit in telling its story at times. This is a game that puts a lot of weight on its plot twists, and luckily they pay off, because this game does have a tendency to be predictable with quite a bit of its narrative. Once we found Maelle and were introduced to the curator, I thought it was pretty obvious that Gustav was just a fake-out main character. That there was more that meets the eye with Maelle, and we were just waiting to learn more about why she was really going to be the main character. I also knew that Ben Starr was advertised as having a prominent role in the game, but he hadn't made an appearance yet. This was all bad news for Gustav. As a result, I saw his death coming a mile away, and that kind of made it less impactful for me when it did happen. When you make a main character switch like that, you can't really just bump Gustav down in the pecking order behind Maelle and the yet-to-be-introduced Verso. He needed to be out of the picture entirely. The second that Lune and Ciel jumped down after the Lampmaster fights, but Maelle and Gustav didn't, I immediately thought, well, this is as far as he makes it, and I was right. However, even though I saw it coming, this scene is really well done in a tragic sort of way. By switching to an in-game fight, it gives the player a sliver of hope that maybe Gustav can survive the encounter. Hell, when the game let me heal, I even thought, maybe I was wrong and there is a way out of this. Then we get the cutscene of Gustav doing actual damage to the white-haired man, only for it to be in vain. Despite being straight up impaled, Gustav still went all out trying to buy enough time for Maelle to escape. When he realizes that this is in fact his last stand, he even reinforces the pep talk that Lune gave him after the last confrontation with Renoir. He turns to Maelle and says, for those who come after, that even though he falls, he wants Maelle to keep going. No one person is more important than the mission. But that's not even the end of it. This scene gets that much more tragic in retrospect, when we learn that Verso didn't really show up just in the nick of time to save Maelle. He admits that he was watching the whole time, but purposely let Gustav die because it would interfere with his plans. When a big character death happens, it needs to serve a greater purpose than just shock value. As you learn more and more about the plot, you do realize that this was when Gustav needed to go. Just like Ned Stark needed to die in order to escalate the war between the Starks and the Lannisters in Game of Thrones, Gustav needed to go in order for Verso to make his move and join the expedition. Having an idea that Gustav wasn't going to make it seems like more of a me problem though. I wasn't under the impression that a lot of other people saw it coming. A trend that I did notice when the game first came out though, was people getting a little impatient with Act 2's storytelling. Verso is clearly hiding things from the rest of the group, and the game's foreshadowing probably has a bit too heavy of a hand. The faceless boys that we find scattered all around the map are clearly different versions of Verso. Verso is clearly Renoir's son, and he's somehow clearly related to the white-haired girl and the smaller avatar of the Paintress. Speaking of that, Maelle and this white-haired Alicia are clearly two sides of the same coin. I could list more examples, but you get it. The player is well aware of these connections, yet the game likes to pretend like it's still a mystery. From what I saw online and from my friends, the only thing that people were missing was the main twist and how this would all get tied together. If they nailed it, then all is forgiven. If they botched it, then they run the risk of tainting what has been a great game so far. Well, at first, I thought they botched it. For like 15 minutes, I was genuinely pissed off when we learned that the canvas world is technically not real. It felt like the ultimate betrayal. I loved my time there, and I wanted to learn more about it, but now it's a Super Mario Bros. 2 situation, and I was not a fan. You're ripped from your comfortable setting that you thought you just saved, only to be thrown in a harsh reality where your brother is dead, your sister is a cunt, your dad is a control freak, and your mom doesn't really care about you. To top it all off, you're not even really Maelle anymore since the fire that the real Verso saved you from scarred your body, blinded you in one eye, and took away your ability to talk. Hell, Alicia even says just breathing causes her physical pain. I'm all about tragic stories if they're told well. At first, I did not think this twist was a good one. I immediately went into panic mode and tried to piece together where they were going to take this, and just prayed that I was able to undo the final homage somehow. But would that even matter if this canvas world wasn't real? Not many video games have given me this kind of feeling. As a huge Final Fantasy VII nerd, the ends of Remake and Rebirth first come to mind. Both of those made me initially think, what the hell is going on? Nobody asked for any of this. To then looking back on both endings more optimistically, the more I thought about it. While I need to wait until Part 3 to really decide if those endings pay off, with Expedition 33, this twist is actually pretty fucking genius. Without initially realizing it, they put me in the same mindset that Maelle has towards this canvas world. Me and a fictional 16-year-old girl were on the exact same wavelength. Just like I didn't want to be in Expedition 33's quote-unquote real world, neither does she. She wants to be Maelle, not Alicia. When you get the whole picture, this twist is actually pretty damn cool. It plays with your emotions in the best way possible. In hindsight, the game actually gives this twist away more than a few times.
Those who can't see, those who know not, that they are not.
My sweet child, you were supposed to stay home. I told you not to worry. But since you're here now, just stay put.
Look, you doofus. Don't you recognize her?
Of course I do.
So, the masked person with Renoir, that's your sister? Not a hard leap to make.
Her name's Alicia.
Why did you accept who you are? Do you know what it means to disappear into nothingness? Have you thought through the consequences? Not just for you, or even me, but for them. You think you're ready to pay the price. But are you willing to let them pay the price for you?
It's pretty impressive that no one really connected the dots that our party aren't technically real people before the full reveal. Even though I loved it, I can completely understand why there were some people who didn't. You get attached to these characters and this world, and it can definitely be a stomach punch to learn that it's all just some plaything for the Desandra family. It's hard to talk about the characters without going over the endings first. This is a game that reveals more and more about its characters up until literally the last seconds they're on screen. I really didn't know which direction they were going to take, but I sure as hell didn't expect them to make the player choose what to do with the canvas. I knew that siding with Verso was going to be probably the right move, but I couldn't help but want to think like Renoir and put my trust in Maelle. I mean, I just talked about how the game made me share her exact thought process regarding the canvas. I never switched out characters' hairs or costumes all game, but still felt the need to change Maelle's hair color from white back to the familiar red. My gut feeling was to save the canvas, even if it probably wasn't the right call. When you watch both endings, I feel like hers is portrayed in a more negative light. There isn't really a good or a bad ending, so I don't want to say that Maelle's ending is the bad ending, but yeah, I'll stick with calling it more negative, and here's my personal interpretation of it. This is no longer Verso's canvas. It's Maelle's and she's controlling it, or in game speak, painting over everything. Apparently there's a debate over who this little kid is, but I definitely think it's a young Verso that's been repainted by Maelle, or maybe even the soul fragment of the real Verso that Maelle has painted back to life. Seeing how old our Verso is, this means Maelle has been here for a long time, and it would make sense that her painter's skills have advanced over the years. We learned that Clair was strong enough to repaint herself, so with enough time and practice, Maelle could do the same with the young Verso. Whether it's a new creation or his soul fragment, this kid is likely just a secondary painted version of Verso. However, this new, younger Verso wouldn't know that he's a fake, unlike our Verso that was given real-world memories. I've seen a lot of people online saying this is just one of Gustav's apprentices, but I don't think so. He kinda looks like Verso, and why would one of Gustav's apprentices not come in with Gustav and Sophie? He also doesn't even sit next to or acknowledge Gustav when he gets there. Now that the paintress is no longer a threat, they don't need such young apprentices anymore either. I think there's way more evidence that it's a newly painted Verso. Anyway, Lune and Ciel are alive and well, while Maelle has also brought back Ciel's husband Pierre. The previously mentioned Gustav and Sophie are also brought back and meet up with everyone to watch Verso perform a music recital. But then something changes. Up until now, this would feel like the perfect happily ever after ending, until we see Verso. Our Verso. The screen goes black and white while we see that he's aged significantly more than the other characters, who may not have even aged at all. Besides his age, something is just off. There's a hesitation to him taking the stage and playing. He doesn't look happy to be there. He looks tired and worn down. We cut back to Maelle, whose smile is less pronounced and now too looks a little uncomfortable. She also seems to have a single tear streak going down from her face. We cut back and forth between the two again, with Verso still hesitating and Maelle no longer smiling. It's a really uncomfortable vibe. Verso looks back to everyone, Ciel smiles, Lune smiles, and we get the jump scare cut to Maelle, who's now smiling again, with the painted eyes that we saw her family have when they were using their powers. As far as I can remember, this is the first time that we see this effect used inside a canvas. It should also be noted that Maelle's right eye, the one that's missing in the real world as Alicia, definitely looks to be missing despite the painted aura. We cut back to Verso, who now looks more calm and starts to play as the game ends. To me, I'm fully under the notion that Maelle has made this canvas her own. That shot where it looks like her right eye socket is empty is pretty telling sign to me that she's spent way too much time in here. It's the real Alicia blending in with the painted Maelle. That she's essentially just become the new paintress, but instead of the Gommage killing people early, now Maelle has taken away death from Lumiere. While the debate was if these people and their world are real, Maelle seems to have taken away their autonomy. It appears as if everyone is stuck in place without aging, or at least aging significantly slower. This would make sense as to why she painted a replacement Verso. She agreed to let the original painted Verso age and die. By the time this Verso dies of old age, this young Verso will be ready to replace him and what has turned into Maelle's canvas. At least while Aline was in control of the canvas, people had their free will. It seems like Maelle has taken at least some of that away as she forces Verso to play his recital and forces everyone else to age very slowly, probably even making this same music recital take place time and time again for nothing but her own pleasure. Just as Verso and Renoir feared, Maelle has decided that she'd rather live and die in the canvas than face reality. Instead, she now controls what reality is. On the surface, this seems like a fair decision. If this is how a demigod-style character decides to live, so be it. But it's not quite that simple. She's now abusing her powers, and it's strongly hinted at that she's making the people of Lumiere bend to her will just for the sake of her own happiness. The debate is no longer if these people are truly alive, because with Maelle's current actions, they kind of aren't. I feel like it's heavily implied that Maelle has taken away, at the very least, some of their free will, which essentially just makes them pawns on her mental chessboard. It's also implied that only Verso knows the truth, but he's now powerless to do anything about it. While he did manipulate and deceive the party at every turn, this is everything that he was trying to fight against coming to fruition. Oh, and if there was any doubt about Verso not being happy with this outcome, I kinda left out the beginning of this sequence until now.
Please, listen to me. Only you can do this. You can do this, please. Unpaint me. Unpaint me. Please. I don't want this life.
Stop saying
I
that.
don't want this life. I don't want this life.
Verso already thought it was best to let the canvas be destroyed, but after seeing Aline struggling in the real world, it's the only option in his mind. It's a really tragic ending, but I do think this could fit if anyone wanted to view it as the canon storyline ending. That Maelle chose to ignore her life as Alicia and just lived in the canvas until she passes away from using too much of her power. While it's not a stereotypical happily ever after ending, it's a pretty conclusive one. We have all the information we need for it to be considered canon. On the other side, Verso's ending definitely seems like the more optimistic path, yet his is still just as tragic in a different way. By defeating Maelle, Verso has doomed the canvas and everyone in it. Once Maelle's overpowered, this then allows Renoir to destroy the canvas once and for all. We see Verso say goodbye to Monoko and Esquier, who always knew that this would eventually be their fate. Ciel looks almost indifferent, like she doesn't really blame him. It's easy to miss, however, she does pull herself back just before she vanishes as Verso reaches out to her. While she might understand his decision, she couldn't fully forgive him for it either. Lune, on the other hand, is visibly pissed off. While this world isn't real to the Desandra family, it's very real to everyone else in it. Lune not saying a word fits perfectly because she's already tried to have this argument more than a few times throughout the game. Whether it was focusing on defeating the Paintress or saving the canvas when she learns the truth, Lune has devoted her entire life to this goal. She's done everything in her power to save Lumiere and the canvas, but in the end, she was just another plaything in the lives of these demigods. At this point, there's nothing more she can do, and this is her way of protesting the inevitable. She's done fighting and just angrily waits for the end. Besides losing the canvas and everyone in it, the real tragedy is that this family is still broken regardless of what they were all trying to achieve. They all try to share a smile that they're finally together after Verso's death, but it's so short and forced. Clair and Alicia acknowledge each other, but Alicia is also the first to leave. That smile she has for Maelle fades quickly after she places down flowers on Verso's grave. She kinda rolls her eyes and just walks away. She's made it clear that her idea of moving on is taking revenge against the writers. But let's focus on why Clair seems to get frustrated and walk away. Renoir and Aline have each other again, but pay close attention to them in this scene. They never once look at either of their children. It's like they don't even acknowledge that Clair or Alicia are even there. Hell, when Clair puts those flowers down and walks directly in their line of sight, they both look away from her. Besides wanting to focus on going after the writers, the way Renoir and Aline are just ignoring their other kids right here is another reason why Clair just walks away after saying her goodbyes. Add in the way she spoke about her parents before Alicia first went into the canvas, she's still fed up with her parents' behavior. The cherry on top of this shit sundae is there are several times where Alicia is looking back, trying to smile, but gets ignored each time. It was obvious in the game that Aline was resentful of Alicia, but despite what he says in the canvas, it seems like Renoir is holding a little spite here too. That all his talk about bringing the family back together might really have been more about his need to be the authority figure and who's in control of the situation. Clair was pretty open about her feelings on Alicia and the fire, but she can at least still smile and look at her. Renoir and Aline don't even act like either child is there. As a final shot, we see everyone from the canvas wave goodbye to Alicia, except for her maelle counterpart. It just goes to further show that while Alicia might have accepted that she'll never see her friends from the canvas again, the last person that she still hasn't been able to say goodbye to yet is Maelle. She'd rather live in that matrix than live in this reality where her family still harbors resentment against her and where she's still disfigured. I think this also helps prove my earlier point that in her ending, she's manipulating the canvas and the people in it. Here, she seems to let go of her friends, but still can't let go of being Maelle. This is a modern day tragedy story that, whichever ending you prefer, doesn't have any type of cliche happy ending, and I kinda love that. Not that I'm the ultimate sadist or anything, but it's just really rare anymore to get that style of ending and have it be well told. When I first realized that there would be multiple endings, I was kinda upset about it. I thought this should be in the same vein of something like The Last of Us, where this is the story that they're telling and you just get to formulate your feelings around it. But even though there's two separate endings, they are essentially tied together. If you choose the Maelle ending, I do think that eventually Renoir and Clair would just re-enter the canvas and start the cycle over again. But rather than stopping the paintress Aline, they're stopping the paintress Maelle. Yes, Alicia hides Verso's canvas, but Clair knows where it is, Aline finds it quickly enough to help in the final Renoir fight, and we can only assume that he'll find it soon enough after leaving too. With the Desandra family getting involved again, Maelle wouldn't have Verso on her side to help in the fights, likely just leading to Renoir destroying the canvas anyway. Neither ending really changes much as we know every character's desires going into the final scenes. With Maelle's ending, you're very likely just delaying the inevitable and everything will still end with the canvas being destroyed. In a weird way, this makes both endings completely canon. If we ever return to this world, I feel like this would probably be the route that the narrative would take, that Maelle became a paintress too, but was eventually forced out just like her mother before her. While everyone has pointed at dealing with grief as being the main theme of the game, I feel like people are also downplaying the themes of control that are at play. While grieving over Verso is what sets the story in motion, it's each character fighting for control that keeps that story moving. Renoir, Clair, Aline, Alicia, and Verso are all fighting for control of the canvas for their own selfish reasons. Renoir is fighting for control over his family's decisions, Aline is fighting to keep the canvas alive, but she's doing it for all the wrong reasons. While Clair sides with Renoir, it's because she wants to control the family's power and take revenge on the writers. Alicia is fighting for control over her Maelle persona, and Verso is fighting for control over the sliver of life that he has left. There's so many more examples, but you get the idea. What started out as grief just highlights all the worst qualities of a family that doesn't seem to be as close as they believed themselves to be. Verso says it best himself at the end.
Verso, stop! You can't just decide this for everyone!
We're all hypocrites, doing the same thing to each other.
Everyone in the family only cares about themselves and their feelings. There's no empathy for one another, and they're all just fighting for their own goals, and at times making uneasy alliances only if it aids both parties. There's no way that characters like this could settle on a happy ending after experiencing this whole narrative. But it's not just the Desandra family that's fighting for control, they're just the most powerful people doing it. Gustav is determined to control his own fate and stop the Gamage. Before knowing she's really Alicia, Maelle sees the expedition as taking control over her life after always feeling like an outcast. Lune embraces the pressures of her controlling parents and uses that as motivation to save Lumiere. She even uses this against Gustav several times in Act 1 when she feels like the expedition is getting sidetracked. Ciel has tried several times to control her own fate after her husband's death. First by attempting to drown herself, and secondly by giving up the expedition and deciding to just have fun with the Gestrals until her eventual Gamage. Hell, before the Gamage, we even have conversations with several NPCs who debate what they should be doing with their lives and how a shortened lifespan changes everyone's perspective. The people of Lumiere don't really grieve over the Gamage anymore, they just want control over the time that they have left. Some people hide, some people cry, and some people just keep banging away until the very end. As much as grief is in the forefront, the desire for control and autonomy is a very strong secondary theme here as well. This is where the God complex comes in with our main characters. Except for Clair, the Desandra family acknowledges that these are real people, but Alicia is the only one who can look past the canvas and see them as equals to the real world. She sees Lumiere as sort of a parallel universe rather than just a canvas to play in. For everyone else, they've made, entered, and erased God knows how many canvas worlds over the years. When he was younger, Renoir even made the same mistake of getting too involved in one and almost died, which is why he feels so strongly about destroying the Lumiere canvas. Verso doesn't view himself as the real thing and fights to be erased. The painted version of Alicia embraces being erased. Clair makes sure to remind the real Alicia that the people inside the canvas aren't real. Minoko wonders if he's truly sentient, and we see that something is obviously not okay with Aline when we get to the top of the monolith. Regardless of whether Alicia wants to recognize it or not, there are some pretty big red flags about these canvas worlds. This kind of leaves the impression that maybe Renoir, Verso, and Clair were right this whole time, even if it means destroying Lumiere for good. With that, I do want to talk about Verso for a little bit. His entire life inside the canvas is a no-win situation. Verso is easily one of the most tragic characters in gaming history. No matter what he does, there's no way to save everyone. All of his choices always result in someone getting hurt. He repeatedly tries to do what he thinks is best, what he believes to be the heroic outcome, yet those same choices always cause someone to suffer. For decades, he has been faced with the fact that everything he does will inevitably cause the death of someone. In the worst scenarios, this meant that he had to take out comrades and even his lover by his own hand. There was a time when Verso truly believed that he could find that third option, that he could save the Desandra family, and he could save everyone in the canvas. But after being painted as an immortal being, repeated failures just proved to him that the same family he's trying to save has left him with only one option. Verso does genuinely care for the people inside the canvas, but he just cares for his family more. But his is also a story about identity crisis and survivor's guilt. Verso knows that he's not the real Verso, and that his mere existence is what's further dividing his family. That the longer he's alive, the longer the people of the canvas will suffer as well. Both sides that he's trying to save are repeatedly punished by simply him existing. That is a brutal fucking backstory. Verso is forced to make an impossible choice and live with the consequences. Just like he gave up his real-world life to save Alicia, he decides that it's best to give up his painted life in order to destroy the canvas. This is a game with complex characters and no right or wrong answers. Despite being on opposite sides, you understand where both Aline and Renoir are coming from. You know why Ciel is quick to give up her expedition, and why Lune is so consumed by the mission. You sympathize with both Maelle and Verso before you choose an ending. There are no true right and wrong answers, just like there are no true good and bad guys. Just characters trying to do the best they can in a shitty situation. With these impossible choices, this eventually leads almost every single character to then just do the selfish thing and pick what's best for them personally. After what we just talked about with Verso, can you really blame him for his point of view? And what about Maelle? Before she was taken in with Gustave, she was an outcast in both of her lives. As Alicia, she loses the real Verso, and as Maelle, she loses Gustave. Both die trying to protect her. Can you really blame her for fighting to control the same canvas that Verso fights to destroy? For all the praise that this game has gotten, I feel like the ending is still a little underappreciated. I think a lot of people underestimate how difficult it is to tell a good tragedy story in today's media. If it's not done well, then people will immediately call it contrived or forced for shock value. Besides the fact that there's a large portion of the audience that will probably want some form of a happy ending for the characters they're now attached to. While Act 2 does drag out some plot points here and there, for the most part, Expedition 33 tells one of the best narratives that I've ever played. I haven't finished a game and felt so satisfied, yet also so uneasy at the same time, since I first beat The Last of Us Part 1. Expedition 33 just has it all. The combat is fun and addicting, there's great depth to the character customization, dialogue doesn't feel robotic, the level design and artistic creativity is arguably some of the best ever, and I just spent long enough telling you how good I think that the narrative is. As I wrap this up, I'm just going to fire off some thoughts I had that I didn't quite know where to fit in, or were just little details about the game that I liked. First up, there shouldn't have been romance options. The scenes with Ciel and Verso are way better than the scenes with Lune and Verso. As characters, I just think that Ciel fits way better with Verso. She's a lot more carefree, wears her emotions on her sleeve, and having a random fling because they might die any day now fits her personality way more than it does Lune's. Not to mention that there's more than a few times where Lune openly doesn't trust Verso. I mean, she's right to feel that way, but distrust usually doesn't lead to characters sleeping together. It also fits for Verso to be oblivious at first and then get attached easily because he's been alone for so long. I don't even think that this stuff should have been optional. Ciel and Verso having a fling fits the narrative really well. Ciel kinda gets the shaft at the end of the game too. Everyone else has some type of endgame character mission except her. A mandatory relationship with her and Verso could have been used as her character mission. Speaking of the side content, this game has some of the best optional content out there. If you just follow the main story, Expedition 33 is very short by RPG standards. It's making the player want to engage with the world and its side content that really pads out the runtime. At first, the scene where Minoko knocks down the building and splits up the party seems kinda contrived, but I thought it made a lot more sense after we learned that he's based on the family dog. Verso tells Minoko to show off and he gets carried away. What do dogs tend to do when they're playing? They get overly excited and break stuff. Considering all the gesturals likely came from the idea of Minoko, it makes sense that they're dumb and love fighting. They're essentially dogs that can talk. Also, the whole rebirthing of gesturals I took to be as getting a new pet after one dies. All pets have different personalities, but a dog isn't gonna cook breakfast or balance out their monthly bills. At the end of the day, a dog is still a dog. Rebirthing gesturals to where they come back with different personalities is probably the equivalent of getting a new pet after the older one dies. Along with death, what's up with the date on Verso's grave? I don't know if that's supposed to mean something, or if it's just an Easter egg and the decision was to match up 33 again, but I didn't see anything online that gave me an answer. There is a trend of Alicia being naive towards her powers and the world in general. Obviously, the fire and being used by the writers is the biggest one, but there are a lot of other little times too where it seems like she doesn't understand the responsibilities of her powers. Even the painted Alicia writes that she hopes there's some third option. From the more powerful and experienced painters, they know there is no third option. That's consistency in your characters, when even the painted version of Alicia follows her same traits of being overly naive and optimistic. Speaking of which, Renoir describes Verso and his Axon as he who guards truth with lies, to explain how Verso kept it to himself that his passion was music and not painting. Then we spend the majority of the game being manipulated by the painted Verso, who routinely lies to the group in order to hide the truth of the canvas. It's also kinda ironic that when Renoir finally decides to trust Alicia to make her own decisions, that she lies to him. After the fire, Alicia turns into the black sheep of the family, and even without any of her memories, her maelle counterpart struggled fitting in with families in Lumiere too. There seems to be a comparable family dynamic between the real Dissandras and the party in Lumiere. Obviously, Minoko is the dog, and Maelle is Alicia. Gustave takes over for the real Verso. Ciel is usually the first character to try and comfort people, and kinda just has a motherly quality to her. Lune is blunt and goal-driven, kinda like Clair. Then painted Verso comes in and takes the leadership role, all while trying to control the direction of this new family, just like Renoir. Don't know if that's me grasping at straws here, or if it was something that the writers intended. Kinda wanted to know more about the in-game Writers' Council too. If there's a Painters' Council and a Writers' Council, are there others, and how many people have these demigod-style powers? I guess we learn all that we technically needed to in order for the story to make sense, but I'd love some more fleshed out lore. There's the not-so-subtle themes of leaving a piece of your soul in your art, but also not letting it consume you. I've seen theories online that Verso might have been an alcoholic, seeing as how his painted version keeps wine and SKA and hides it from everyone else. And I haven't even mentioned the soundtrack yet. If you ever want to feel like you've underachieved in life, just go look up the kid who made the soundtrack. I guess, really, you could say the same thing for the majority of the people who worked on this. They all had very minimal, or in some cases, no on-the-job experience, but were just really passionate and creative, and the end product was this gem of a game. I'm already pretty slow at making videos, and if I got into everything that I could, this would take me another 6 months to finish. But I'll just end it on this. Once the brand new shine is worn off and we get some time to look back, I firmly believe this is going to be grouped in with the greatest JRPGs of all time. That's all I've got this time around. Took a few rewrites, but I tried to keep it down from my usual, 2-hour ramblings. You know all about the like, comment, and subscribe stuff. Do so if you please. It always helps the channel. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you enjoyed it. See you guys.